Hello and welcome to Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Corey Erdman and Morgan Campbell here with you. Morgan, the bell has returned.
The bell's back.
So let's go ahead and set the tone for the rest of the show. Morgan Campbell.
Indeed.
We live in a world of which Tyson Fury is the heavyweight champion.
Yes.
How does that make you feel?
It's amazing. It's a triumph of ring boxing.
That's right.
Because as we discussed last week, Tyson Fury comes from the tradition of bare knuckle boxers in Ireland and Northern England. So there's somewhere in Ireland, there's some guy in a bar pounding his chest saying, well, Tyson Fury's not the heavyweight champ till he fights me bare knuckle in the backyard. And then afterward, we'll go to Uncle Jim's house. But till he beats me, I don't respect ring boxing.
When he came home yesterday for that parade, he probably came home to a stack of VHS tapes of challenges from people all over Ireland and the United Kingdom saying, I want my shot.
Yeah, Baldy Bullocks, I'm the king of the trap.
Vladimir, you think you're getting a rematch? You're going to have to wait because the Joyce clan, they're stepping up first. The Nevins.
The Queen McDonoughs, all of them.
They're all next. Honestly, I was at least fairly dismissive of Fury's chances in this fight, as were a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I wasn't dismissive of Fury's boxing ability, but maybe I was lulled into this belief. Not maybe. I was lulled into this belief that Klitschko was just not going to lose until he just decided to retire and walk away.
Yes.
Because it had been so long since he had been even challenged. And the narrative was that there was just no talent in this division that was anywhere near him. He was so far ahead of them in terms of his technical proficiency that until he just walked away, that belt was never changing hands. I had conceded that.
Right, but what we hadn't seen across the ring from Klitschko in a long time is someone who could either match or surpass just his physicality.
Yeah.
And you could tell as you watch the fight that Klitschko just had a problem with that. He didn't know how to adjust to that because he's just so used to people having to come to him, and then he just gets to jab them and throw straight right hands as they try to get to him, and then he just controls the fight that way. This is the first time in forever that Klitschko had to go find somebody. And Fury, as big as he is, wasn't all that easy to hit. Like his head movement, he wasn't, because Klitschko, as you watch the fight, as you watch Klitschko fights, Klitschko doesn't hit to the body, even though Tyson Fury's body is this giant target. Klitschko has been out of the habit of body punching for so long. He wasn't going to get into that habit in this fight, but the body would have been a more inviting target, but it just would have forced Klitschko to be someone that he hasn't ever been, or at least hasn't been for a long time, and there he was.
Well, Fury, as you mentioned, was not an easy target to hit. He was very, very jittery, lots of feints. And if you're facing a guy who's only throwing ones and twos, a guy who's very economical with his punches,
yes,
the more looks that you give him, you make him wait and wait and wait, and a 40-year-old fighter isn't going to pull the trigger quite as fast as he used to. And Fury knew that he didn't have to take a whole lot of risks.
Nope.
He just had to keep moving, keep his head moving, keep his feet moving, and he would at least be able to steal a couple of rounds and figure it out from there.
Well, yeah, and you get towards the end of the fight, and there's this point where Jonathan Banks does his best Emmanuel Stewart impression, and he comes with the rousing between rounds. Because it's a motivational speech. They're not talking tactics anymore. He's like, look, you're gonna have to go out and fight this guy. This is a boxing match. You're gonna have to go out and fight this guy, which is fine if you have a guy on the stool who's there for fights.
Right.
But Klitschko is a clinician. He's a technician. He does this for sport. He's not a fight guy. So for him to go out and be someone for the final 3 rounds that he's never been in his whole career is asking a ton.
Yeah, I mean, we saw, although not in any sort of a desperate scenario, but we saw when he fought Eddie Chambers that Emmanuel Stewart went bonkers in the 12th round, and then he came out and knocked him out.
Yes.
And to a degree, we saw a more aggressive Vladimir in the 12th round. But that was never a situation he'd ever been in his entire career. Not even the fact that that's just not his temperament, but the fact that when does he ever have to rally from behind? When has he ever had to really step on the pedal and knock someone out for any reason other than the fact that Emmanuel just wants to see a knockout for his own entertainment?
Yes. And doing that against Eddie Chambers is one thing. Doing that against Tyson Fury is something completely different. And it's funny because this fight here wasn't that much different from, in terms of the amount of action, wasn't that much different from the Rigondeaux fight.
Yeah.
Right? Very little punching, very little punching, a lot of feigning, a lot of head movement. But what made it interesting was the stakes. So you get into, the final 3 rounds of a fight that in terms of action is pretty boring. If there's just like this is on a PBC card. This is Dominic Brazil and
it'd be
some other guy.
massacred.
Right. But the stakes made it interesting, right? Because this isn't just some guy who's about to lose. This is Klitschko. We haven't seen Klitschko lose since, my math isn't good.
9 years ago?
Well, exactly.
9.5 years ago, yeah.
So here's where it is. Action-wise, it was pretty dreadful, but the stakes, made the final few rounds worth watching.
But that's another way in which boxing can be exciting. Because you can have your absolute barn burner forehead-to-forehead brawls, and those are inherently exciting optically. Those are very, very pleasing. But then there are the fights, as you mentioned, with the stakes, the drama that is inherent with the title being on the line, with an upset brewing. It probably was, in terms of just raw entertainment value or action. Raw action was the same as Drion Francisco, Guillermo Rigondeaux. But was there ever a question? There was no, can Guillermo Rigondeaux beat Drion Francisco? Yes, that was answered when the first bell, when they hit this.
That was answered when they signed
the contract. Right. Big questions as to whether or not Fury could beat Klitschko coming into this. And, I'm sure that there will be people who said, I told you so, or you dismiss Fury's chances and whatnot. Yeah, but so did everybody else, because the narrative throughout the fight was, hey, why isn't Klitschko doing more? If he just did more, he could win this fight. Clearly, that was the groupthink from pretty much everybody. If you believed in Fury's boxing skills, that's one thing, but I really doubted if there was someone who was 100% sure out there that Tyson Fury was going to beat Klitschko. If you were, then this fight wasn't exciting.
Well, exactly. It's who was 100% sure that Tyson Fury would beat Klitschko is Latin American sports writer Twitter.
Right.
Who lit up my timeline during the fight because Fury had the word Venezuela across the back of his shorts.
Right.
So he was their new favorite. And we had to start explaining, he has a daughter named Venezuela. Well, that made them like him even more. So there it went. But it is different. You can tell someone to do more. I can tell someone to do more, but I'm not the one getting punched in the face.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm not the one, again, who's facing the type of puzzle that I've never had to solve before. Because it's not just an opponent. It's a guy that's 6'9" with an asterisk.
Yeah. With 90-inch reach.
Tyson Fury's 6'9", like we're in New York. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Correct. Yeah.
6'9".
We're in New York.
Right. But he physically, presented Klitschko with the challenge that Klitschko hasn't had to face before. So it's one thing to just say, well, just do more. It's another thing to figure out how to do it on the fly in the 1 minute between rounds while this guy's moving around the ring and not punching to hurt you, but punching to unsettle you.
We are not ever ones to talk about sort of intangibles or things that you can't possibly quantify, but is there something at all to what Klitschko was dealing with outside of the ring coming into this fight? Or is that just taking away from Fury's performance and from the possible erosion of Klitschko's skills? Just the fact that this fight was postponed because he had a very serious calf injury. Then he has his wife who's in rehab for postpartum depression. This was her first public appearance coming to the fight. Anything to that, or is that just something? Is that just something to possibly sell a rematch?
But we don't know what Klitschko's private life is like otherwise.
Yeah,
there might always be drama. In his private life, we just don't know.
From what we have known before, there has been none, but we don't actually know that. From what we've been told, there's been nothing.
So that much we don't know. But what we do know is he had a calf injury, and what we do know is that he's 39 years old. And what we do know is that when you look at the history, especially of the heavyweight division, is that a lot of long reigning champions have this fight right here.
Yep.
You're the champion for a long time, and you're presented with some guy who you might have beaten easily 10 years ago, but it's not 10 years ago. And you lose this close decision. There will be a rematch, just like there was two Ali Spinks fights.
Yep.
Just like
there were Spinks.
There were two home fights
Spinks
against the other Spinks. This is what happens. Like Lennox Lewis broke the cycle because he fought the first Klitschko. Said, hey, wait a minute, this was tougher than I wanted it to be. Bye. Take my money and my brain cells and go do something else. But traditionally, there is the rematch. So this is what we do know. What we don't know is what Vladimir Klitschko's private life is like all the time.
Yep.
But we do know he's old. We were just looking at his box rec. Let's not forget, Vladimir Klitschko was a professional boxer when Peyton Manning and Charles Woodson were still in college football. These guys weren't even in the NFL yet.
And they are broken down.
These are the oldest guys in the NFL. He turned pro the same time as Kobe Bryant.
Yes.
Now, I don't know that Vladimir Klitschko's going to...
Is he going to go on the Players Tribune?
You're right, and write a poem.
Yeah.
Goodbye to boxing. This is a blatant ripoff of... this is a Roots song with Common. Love of My Life. It's a blatant ripoff of Black Thought's verse. Love of My Life. Except it doesn't rhyme. Congratulations on your retirement, Kobe Bryant, the thug poet, which was also a ripoff of Nas, but I digress. Point is, Klitschko's been pro a long time. And it gets to the point where you're going to lose to guys who maybe in terms of skills, if we're checking off boxes, aren't your equal. But again, Father Time is undefeated. This is why smart people get out while they're ahead.
Well, we don't know how much longer Klitschko is going to be around, but on the other side of the break, we'll talk about what he might do next. We'll talk about the effect that this win for Tyson Fury has on the heavyweight division. Lots more to get to here on Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Welcome back to Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Corey Erdman and Morgan Campbell here with you as we look back on Tyson Fury's historic and shocking upset of Vladimir Klitschko over the weekend in Germany. A new heavyweight champion was crowned. And suddenly, this moment that we were waiting for, but perhaps thought would never happen, the moment where the heavyweight division opens up has actually taken place. Because we've said for years, if you remove Vladimir from the equation, maybe the division isn't the most talent-heavy, but if you look at the top 10 heavyweights, there aren't a whole lot of boring fighters in there, and there are a lot of exciting, if not sloppy brawls that could be made for the heavyweight title, and they would be a whole lot of fun to watch. And suddenly, with Fury at the top and people gunning for Fury, a lot of those open up, and a lot of those fights become a lot of those fights for a heavyweight title become a whole lot more exciting.
What we have in multiple divisions now is what a lot of boxing fans, partisan boxing fans, and also mainstream fans that don't really follow the sport but kind of audit it, they now have exactly what they've been asking for, right? Like with the retirement of Floyd Mayweather, because Mayweather's, the last half of his career, boxing's boring. All we do is see Mayweather fight guys that he can beat. Well, he can beat them all. That's not his fault. Well, if it was more competitive, it would be more exciting. Heavyweight boxing, it's boring because all we see is the Klitschko's fighting guys that can beat. Well, of course, because they can beat everyone. That's not their fault. That's what they do. One guy's retired, the other guy's has lost his title, might come back, might not. But now we have exactly what you people were asking for. Now, are you going to pay more attention now that the dominant player has been removed and now there's going to be this open competition to fill the void? Are you guys going to watch more now?
Yeah.
Or are you going to find something else to complain about? Or is the next complaint going to be, well, there's not what we need is a singular dominant great heavyweight like Tyson was and like Ali was. I'm like, well, we had one. We had two of them. They're from the same family.
Yeah. Or
I said it was boring.
Well, he's not technically skilled. He's not in tremendous shape. We had that too.
Right.
Hopefully you're happy with because also entertainment wise, we have this crazily outspoken, brash.
Well, that's the thing.
White heavyweight champion that everyone wants to see.
Well, that is the thing, is that for the first time in a long time, yes, because
whose native tongue is English.
Right, because that was the excuse for not watching heavyweight boxing before. Well, yeah, these guys are heavyweight champs and they're dominant, but they're not from America. They don't speak much English. Personality-wise, they're kind of boring. Now we have... Yes, like the UFC would be all over this guy.
Oh yeah,
right? They'd have Tyson Fury out here in Ivory Coast flags.
Yeah.
In Ireland,
Tyson Fury fight kit. Yeah.
But this is what we have. And to your point, he's a white heavyweight champion who's brash and outspoken, and not unlike Mayweather in that his fights aren't all that exciting. Except the time he's getting knocked down.
Yeah.
But his style of fighting is not super exciting. But His personality is so big that he sells himself outside the ring. Now, in England, that's not, and we also talk like North America is the only place where boxing counts. Like in England, none of this is a problem. In England, all these people are already famous, and he can make all kinds of money without ever coming back to North America.
Of course. And important to note that outside of the Klitschko fight, he has been quite exciting.
Yes.
So, I mean...
that is true. Steve Cunningham fight was exciting.
Well, yeah. Absolutely. Nevin Pikic.
Right. Well, let's remember the Steve Cunningham fight on the mic afterwards. Because he's a guy, Tyson Fury, because he comes from this tradition of people who talk trash for months on YouTube and on VHS and on DVD before these fights happen. He's skilled with the jokes and he's skilled at the delivery, unlike Broner.
Right.
So remember Nazem Richardson used to, he would tell his fighters, man, I need you to, you're swimming without getting wet. You're swimming without getting wet. And then he knocks out Steve Cunningham and they give him Mike after the fight. He says, you can't swim without getting wet. he knew the line that he was going to deliver. Boom. Timing, flawless. Unlike Broner. So we'll see if he's able to crack the U.S. market. But the difference now is if he can't crack the U.S. market, it's not going to matter because
it wasn't cracked already.
Right, and you can make all kinds of money in England, and getting these American heavyweights to come over to England. And just because Americans aren't paying super close attention doesn't mean the guy's not famous. Doesn't mean he's not making a ton of money.
Yeah, and it is clear that the dream is for Fury to eventually face Deontay Wilder, which either turns Fury into a bigger star in America to whatever degree he can become a star here, or really launches Deontay Wilder into the stratosphere.
Yes.
Because if Wilder knocks out the legitimate heavyweight champion, then he becomes a legitimate heavyweight champion, and all of these claims that they're already making about Wilder being the heavyweight champion are substantiated on top of him having the platform and all these other things that come from being under the PBC banner.
And also what I wonder is if Tyson Fury's ascent to the heavyweight crown, if he winds up campaigning over in the U.S. again, if it basically winds the clock back 30 years and brings us back to the days of like fights and fighters that are marketed nakedly, blatantly along ethnic lines.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Because here we have this guy of Irish descent. Hey, Boston, come out and cheer for this Irish guy.
Right.
Against the Bronze Bomber.
Well, and don't forget that Fury has no filter and will say patently offensive things to market a fight, which he might believe also, which he gets a pass for because this is boxing.
Right.
Yes. It is funny, and I guess we've been sort of hypocritical on that front too, because we blast Devin Alexander.
Yes.
But Tyson Fury says basically the same things, and we have given him a pass. We should not give him a pass.
No.
I guess I apologize for that, nonetheless.
And we could be, because the other thing is this is boxing, and that sells boxing.
Yeah.
And you can sell racial animus by proxy.
Yeah. Or
you can just do it directly.
Right.
Right. And are we gearing up for the second coming of Holmes Cooney? Right. Again, where you take this guy and you take him to every market in the U.S. that has a big Irish population. Boston, Chicago, I don't know where else, and build him up that way. I mean, the way the UFC is blatantly doing with Conor McGregor. Here, let's have a fight at the what's the arena called in Boston now? TD Bank.
Oh,
North
TD
Garden.
Bank, yeah.
Right. Hey, Tyson Fury, you can have this open workout on St. Patrick's Day. This kind of thing. Because as far as even though we're 30 years past Holmes Cooney, I don't know that part of marketing boxing ever changes.
No. We can see that in the world. we can certainly do some stuff with that.
Right.
On the other side of the break, we'll talk about another UK fighter, another world champion, James DeGale, who had a heck of a fight with Lucian Bute, a fight that a lot of people forgot was even happening this weekend in the avalanche of fights that were taking place. It was a really good one. We'll break it down when we return here on Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Welcome back to Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Corey Urban, Morgan Campbell here with you. As we alluded to before the break, there was an excellent fight in Quebec City over the weekend. The main event on Showtime, James DeGale defending his IBF super middleweight title against Lucian Bute. And, we talked about how we were dismissive of Tyson Fury's chances against Vladimir Klitschko. I was maybe even more dismissive of Lucian Bute's chances against James DeGale, and what we wound up getting was, a fight that was probably just below fight of the year caliber, but in terms of high-level boxers, really putting it out there at a really good tempo, this is a fight that you show kids, like, hey, this is how you can be in a good fight and be really skillful and masterful,
It did show that a skillful performance, and an exciting performance, these things are not mutually exclusive.
Exactly,
You can do both at the same time. Now, I didn't see that fight until like just this morning. I was traveling over the weekend, and even though we're here in our plush New York studio, I do have a lot of access to Canadian boxing Twitter. It's just a coincidence.
Yeah.
A lot of Canadian boxing Twitter was outraged, telling me that Lucian Bute had been robbed. He wasn't robbed.
No.
DeGale clearly won the fight. Bute showed more than I thought he would. Because when I think of Bute, I think of him being, a dominant fighter 6 or 7 years ago. When I think of him losing to Froch, think of him losing to Pascal. So when I think of him in a world title fight, I think of him as, I had been thinking of him as several notches below, but he was, a step behind DeGale. But, at that level, that's all you need is to be a step ahead. You don't need to be 10 steps ahead.
The thing is, there was a point in the fight, as we got later into the fight, where he wasn't a step behind DeGale anymore. Where he was right there with him or, winning these rounds, concluding, because this, if this was a 116-112 fight, that's a close fight.
Yes.
I don't know if they'll do a rematch or anything like that, but Bute, we assumed, I think the biggest knock on Bute was that he didn't have a chin. After we saw what happened against Carl Froch, we assumed, hey, if anyone's going to hit this guy hard, he's going to be out of there. And I think people thought that after seeing DeGale drop Andre Durrell, same thing is going to happen to Bute and it's going to be over. Then you saw him against Pascal, and he just wasn't really able to pull the trigger. Maybe looking back on that, Pascal is a tough style matchup for anyone.
Yes.
But maybe the positive to take out of that fight is that Pascal, who was able to even wobble a guy like Sergey Kovalev, wasn't able to really hurt Bute in that fight. So maybe he was a little bit tougher, a little bit more durable than we were giving him credit for. Regardless, it is clear that he has a little bit more left in the tank. And if you put him in there with, say, an Arthur Abraham or another like lower tier titleist at 168, he absolutely could hold a world title again.
Yeah, and Bute isn't different from Cotto, who we were talking about last week, where he's at this point where he can make a decision. There are a lot of 168-pound fighters he can beat. Can he beat the best in the world, the absolute best in the world at 68 and 75? No. But there are fights he can win. So then he has to kind of decide, does he want to be the B-side of these super elite fights, or does he want to take on these guys he can beat, and even though they're not the DeGales of the world, guys he can beat and continue making a living that way.
Well, and clearly the Quebec fan base is cool with him continuing to try.
Yes.
And this performance probably gave him a little bit more of a boost, because the Quebec fan base, for a certain type of fighter, and maybe it isn't even actually the Quebec fan base, but it is something that happens when you are the squeaky clean, polite fighter like Lucian Bute. It doesn't always work out. A lot of people say, if you're like that, you're not going to be able to sell tickets. You need some sort of over-the-top personality to become popular. But in certain cases, when you're really successful and you have the type of personality that Bute has, you can become very popular. You're sort of universally loved by everybody, but also what happens is when you do take your losses, you get that sort of compassion.
Yes.
And we've seen that a lot with fighters from the UK.
I was gonna say it's almost like being from England.
It's
not like over here.
No, you're out of here. You're a fraud. You've been fooling us, and get out of here.
But you've been exposed. Yeah, we're let down. We take it personally.
Exactly. But in the UK, where you have a similar sort of regional pride that Quebec has towards its fighters and towards any athletes and sports teams from the province, they will get behind you if they feel that you are a good person.
I don't know that it's so much Bute being a good person. And they went on about this in the broadcast. It was the moment where DeGale spits out his mouthpiece.
Yeah, and he says...
and Bute just says, he steps back and lets the referee...
I actually think that was less about him being a gentleman, more about him projectile spitting the mouthpiece at him, and he was sort of like,
right,
what am I
supposed to do?
Yeah.
Right. But I think a lot of Bute's appeal comes from the fact that he chose Quebec. Here's a guy that came from Romania. He could have gone anywhere in North America. Like, you look at all these guys that come from different countries, and they come to North America to train. They train in Las Vegas. They train in Miami. They train in L.A. This guy comes from a country, could have gone anywhere, because any fight camp anywhere on this continent would have been glad to have him. Chose Quebec, chose Montreal, chose to learn French before he chose to learn English.
Yep.
And that really endeared him to the local market. Because, again, he could have been anywhere, but he chose that area, chose that market, chose that city. And I think they're repaying that type of affection. And they would embrace him whether he was humble or whether he was a guy who won and talked trash, just as long as he talked trash in a way that reflected well on Montreal and on Quebec.
But I wonder, because, there were other guys who... it could be a racial thing too, but there's a lot of Haitian fighters who made the same decision. And they don't have the kind of fanfare necessarily. Like Bute is more popular than Adonis.
It almost is absolutely a racial thing.
Joachim Alcine had, the first Haitian to ever win a world title. Never had that kind of fanfare. When he fought Stefan Ouellette,
Montreal said,
right. They were there for the white guy that he beat. They weren't there for him.
Wait,
it was
Corey,
the bikers.
There is no racism in Canada.
No, of
Corey.
course not. No, we don't live there.
There's no racism in Canada. No. These are all attributable to other intangible factors than race has never won, because this is Canada. There's only racism here in New York.
That's right. We'll talk more about James DeGale and his performance when we come back. We got to hit the break here on Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Welcome back to Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Corey Erdman, Morgan Campbell here with you. James DeGale, as we mentioned, turned in an excellent performance against Lucien Bute in a better than expected, highly competitive, action-packed fight in Quebec City over the weekend. Morgan, this was like the fifth time in the last 5 weeks on boxing television that another guy is suddenly the new Marvin Hagler. But maybe,
Wait, who said that?
The Showtime broadcast crew.
About
who
DeGale.
I love, about DeGale.
Oh, man.
In fairness,
there's only one Marvin Hagler.
There's only one Marvin Hagler, and it's Marvin Hagler. But
he's in hiding, devastated.
That's right. He's devastated. Exactly. Right. He's back in. Where did he hide? Did he just hide in Rockford? Oh yeah. Well, now he is. Yeah. But I wonder what year is this from? 87.
This is before he started making. This is before
he really went into hiding. Yeah. At least with DeGale, you have a switch hitting, suddenly aggressive, bald fighter who fights on the road is better than the previous Hagler comparisons.
Who was it again? Was Golovkin the new Hagler?
Golovkin was the new Hagler.
Terrence
Crawford was also the new Hagler.
Yes.
If any of those three are Marvin Hagler, I guess I would go with James DeGale. I don't know.
I don't even know what to say.
I don't know. Listen,
let Hagler be Hagler.
I will say,
and until James DeGale perfects the Boston black scent, then he's not the next Marvin Hagler. No one ever will be, except maybe Ralph Tresvant, because now he's bald.
That's right. DeGale does have a lot going for him, though. Is he marketable in the UK as a ticket seller? Thus far, we've proven that he isn't.
Yep.
But as a guy who's going to go on the road, talks trash really well, suddenly is very exciting.
Yes.
A whole lot of fun to watch. He's made fights with Lucien Bute and Andre Durrell. Pretty compelling ones to watch, and we didn't think either of those
and Andre Durrell is not
Andre Durrell in particular
is not an action fighter.
No.
At all.
Maybe there's something to DeGale being, a serious player. Clearly he's a serious player, but I mean a marketable asset on US TV.
And I find it interesting that he's not super marketable in England.
Yeah.
Where the sport, as we've established,
they hate him.
It's still very much a mainstream sport. Fans don't really have the same set of racial hang-ups, in terms of getting behind one fighter or another.
Right.
English fans didn't hesitate to get behind Frank Bruno back in the day.
Sure, yeah.
The way Quebec fans would hesitate to get behind Adonis or Joachim Alcine. And people hating you, doesn't stop you from selling tickets. Often that helps you sell tickets.
Yeah.
So his lack of marketability is mystifying to me.
Yeah, I've never understood it because, remember the Groves fight. everyone was there to see Groves beat him.
Right.
You know, that's what it was there for. And you're right. Usually, if you're good at being a jerk, which he is,
yes,
people they buy tickets to see you get beat up.
Yep.
But thus far, it's sort of the opposite. It's like this just sort of disdain for James DeGale. And, you know, maybe his fan base is growing. You know, maybe we have some UK viewers and listeners out there who could tell us if that tide is shifting. But I certainly know at one point, and you could tell by the TV slots that he was getting,
yep,
the venues that he was fighting in. Now the fact that he has to be on the road all the time,
yes,
that to a certain degree, that was the case. One point I did want to make though, and it was the statistic was pointed out on the broadcast with Fury winning the title over the weekend as well, that the UK right now has 13 world champions.
Yes.
And I wonder, you know, and I would have to think, a lot of it is attributed to how they bring their fighters up, and that's never changed over time. But I think in the 80s, when maybe we got better athletes in boxing, that some of the American talent was able to overcome the way that they nurture fighters in the UK. But you can't escape the fact that if you're bringing a guy up in the way that they do it in the United Kingdom, where you have to win, you know, a Commonwealth title, a British title, and you're fighting 50-50 fights.
Yes.
And you're fighting 12 rounders as you're coming up. DeGale had to do it. He had to take a loss against George Groves. You know, Fury had to do it, winning all these titles coming up. There's no question that benefits a fighter, and you wonder if that is a direct cause of this surge of UK success in boxing right now.
Yeah, well, and the industry is so much more vibrant there than it is here. Yeah, and to your point, because you don't necessarily see, except when the Olympics are in England, you don't see a lot of English guys, you know, winning all these amateur fights. And I don't know, it's sort of like Mexico in that there's not a lot of emphasis on what happens in the amateurs. Whereas over here, Canada, US, especially here in New York, there's so much emphasis on having this long amateur background. And you have all these guys trying to get to the Olympics because the Olympics is this marketing platform, but that style of boxing doesn't necessarily prepare you to fight as a professional. And you turn pro and you have to learn a whole new style of fighting. It's different now without the headgear in amateur boxing. Now they've gone back to the must system. So the fights look a lot more like pro fights. So we'll see how that plays out in future generations. You know, but for 20 years, you just had all these Americans, Canadians, trying to get the Olympics. You have this huge bottleneck because only one person in each weight class, best case scenario, makes the Olympics. And then you got to get a medal and then hope that you can parlay that into the type of platform that gets you paid. And then for everyone else, you've just spent 10 years learning how to fight like an amateur, and then you turn pro and you have to learn a whole new style of fighting, whereas the English guys have a much smoother transition from amateur fighing to pro fighting.
And not to mention, because of, you know, the way that it's staggered that we just talked about, where the stakes are higher in the fights early in your career, and the fact that it's popular, they care about these regional titles. There is that regionalism that we referenced when we were talking about Bute and DeGale. You can make money early in your career.
Yes.
You can't make money early in your career here at all.
No.
The money that you make is from the guy that picks you up to be your manager or your advisor, who's just going to fund you and give you a stipend, basically.
Yes.
Because your purse ain't going anywhere but to your corner.
Right.
It doesn't pay for much else. You can make some cash. You can sell some tickets as an 11-0 guy with a Commonwealth title in the United Kingdom. So there's a bit more of a pull to turn pro and not languish in the amateurs for that long.
Well, yeah, and there's the idea too that you can follow a fighter for his whole career, whereas over here in North America, you just kind of wait till someone becomes famous.
Right. Like, oh, you're 14-0, you can make it you can be a swing fight now.
Right.
Here you are.
Now I'll follow you because you're famous. But then how are people going to follow you if they don't know who you are?
Right. So no wonder they jump off the bandwagon when they lose.
Right.
I'm just going to wait for the next game. I don't have any, like, I wasn't in the game early. Like, why would I do that? Well, but I'm actually committed to you.
But that's also, again, indicative of the difference between how sports fans, sports audiences perceive boxing over there versus over here. Because over there, boxing is the same as soccer. Like, you're going to follow your team for the whole season. Yes, you'll have your bandwagon jumpers if your team is good, but you have a sizable base of fans going to follow the team through the whole season, whether they win or whether they lose. Whereas over here, you kind of look at boxing like the Super Bowl. And there's all these people that just kind of jump in for the big fights and then jump back out. In the same way that Super Bowl viewing is much high, not as high as the NFL says it is. Oh, we got 6 billion viewers for the Super Bowl this year. There's only 6 billion people on the entire planet. How'd you get that many viewers? They don't have TVs. Get out of here. But this is how North Americans view it, right? There's certain fights we'll pay attention to, but only certain times a year, and we'll all jump in. But in the meantime, we want all this to have developed during the time that we weren't paying attention.
Well, I don't know if all of North America is going to jump in on this one, Morgan, but coming up after the break, we'll talk about the Battle of Brooklyn. Brooklyn is certainly going to be tuning in for Peter Quillen and Danny Jacobs. We'll also touch on the PBC from Texas over the weekend and plenty more when we return here on Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Welcome back to Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Corey Erdman and Morgan Campbell here with you. Time to round out the boxing action from the weekend. Of course, I was in Dallas, Texas as part of the PBC broadcast on NBC in the afternoon. We saw our man Silky Wilkie get beaten up pretty badly by Jamal Charlo in the main event, Morgan. That was not competitive. In fact, the entire card was not competitive for 1 second of the broadcast.
First of all, the main event, didn't look too different from the Cotto Canelo main event in that you had two completely different sizes of fight.
Charlo is huge for 154. Huge.
What does Charlo enter the ring at?
You know what?
Because he looked like a solid 170 as well.
When we were in fighter meetings, he was miserable trying to cut the weight. And he left fighter meetings, went to the scale, didn't quite make it, had to go back up into the bathtub to make it. And on his way out, he was pretty miserable throughout the interview. And on his way out, he sort of leans over and he's like, "Hey, guys, one more thing. I think this is it for me at 154. And I'm like, "Oh, okay." I mean, I understand. He's a giant at 154 with a ramrod jab and a whole lot of skills to work with here.
Yeah, well,
I think people are sleeping on how good Jamal is. He's really good.
We will see how that translates to the 160-pound division.
Right.
Unless he becomes a professional catchweight guy.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a middleweight, but everyone fight me at 156.
Thing is, after the fight, he was like, "Yeah, I'm ready to defend my title again." I think when you feel better once you've eaten, and actually gone through it, you have a different mindset.
It's like the Snickers commercials, right?
Exactly.
You're not yourself when you're hungry. And the Errol Spence fight too. I like how Errol Spence fights because he gets hit just often enough to make things interesting.
Yeah,
his defense is far from airtight.
No, yeah,
but he has so many ways to hit you.
Yeah.
The punch that stands out to me is the lead left hook that he threw with zero arc on his arm. So it wasn't even designed to go around the back of your right glove. Yeah. He just kind of turned his body and the arm came out and he hits you with the left hook in the front of the face. How do you stop? You can't stop that. Yeah. You can't.
Well, that is actually an interesting point about Spence. The fact that his defense isn't airtight, it speaks to his temperament in the ring. Mm-hmm. He's so calm. And when we were looking at film study and watching with Sugar Ray and BJ Flores, one thing they both pointed out is if he does have a weakness, is that he's okay with punches being thrown at him. Yeah. Because he always believes that he can pick them off, and sometimes he doesn't.
He just gets hit.
But he's so good offensively that he just doesn't care.
Yes.
Which I think he would probably admit too. He's not going to speak to what his weaknesses are, right. But the fact that he's willing to stand in there, catch a shot, and then shoot it back is also what makes him a good offensive fighter. So there's a trade-off there.
Yeah, and I'm really interested to see because is he 147 or 154?
He's 47.
Right. I'm interested to see what happens now because he's the Van Heerden fight was a much tougher test than this one.
I agree. Yeah.
Now I want to see him against. He's almost ready for the elite.
Sure, and this fight, in my opinion, I know the three main fights weren't particularly competitive, but if this one leads to a fight against a top 10, top 15 guy, then I think it's fine. But if this is he's
more than ready for a top 15 guy.
Absolutely.
I think he's ready for. Beyond the Guerreros of the world, I think he's ready for the Thurmans and people like that.
I mean, in theory, this was an eliminator to see who faces the winner of Kevin Bezier and Kell Brook.
Okay.
And him against Kell Brook, Listen, that's a really tough fight for Errol Spence.
Yes.
That's a real fight. He
Yes.
beats Kevin Bezier, but I don't think Bezier is going to beat Kell Brooks. So, we'll see where Errol Spence goes next. Also, Erickson Lubin was on that card as well. The vicious knockout over poor Alexis Camacho.
That one I haven't
the
seen
former
yet.
circus performer. But Erickson Lubin wearing all Dallas Cowboys apparel, and Liam McHugh asked him, like, hey.
Isn't he from Florida?
Yeah, aren't you from Florida? Why are you wearing Cowboys apparel? I was like, I just wanted to show love to the Cowboys fans. And so he follows up and he's like, well, what if PBC's in Chicago next time? What would you wear? He's like, probably Cubs gear. Like, at least you're honest, man. At least you're honest.
But that's spoken like a guy who doesn't really know Chicago. Because whether or not the locals will cheer for the Cubs and support a guy in Cubs gear depends entirely on which part of Chicago
exactly,
you're in,
yeah.
right?
We're Blackhawks
You're
gear,
just safer with the
Bulls.
Bears gear. Yes.
Yeah, the Bears gear, exactly, yeah.
Bears gear the safest bet. Because listen, if that fight's on the south side of Chicago and you wear Cubs gear, you might as well wear Yankees gear. They will boo you out of the ring.
I mean, the one thing that was... One thing that was interesting is that those fights went so quickly that we had to add 5 swing fights on this broadcast. Bring it out there forever. John Molina fought on that card.
I didn't know John Molina was
It started
so
at like noon.
Oh, goodness.
We had to tape that fight at like 12 o'clock. There was no one even in there. John Molina, fresh off the suspension from the diuretics.
Oh, yes. I
Yeah.
see. I was thinking he had stopped fighting, but it was which fight was that where he tested positive?
After the Broner fight. So we haven't seen him since then.
Right.
He had the suspension in Nevada and sort of took some time off. But anyway, another PBC card in the books. And this weekend, Showtime Championship Boxing returns with Peter Quillen and Danny Jacobs, a middleweight title fight at the Barclays Center. Should be a fun atmosphere in Brooklyn. Difficult fight to call, too, because I think you can find flaws in both Quillen and Jacobs. But you wonder if Quillen is just a little bit more powerful than Jacobs is at this point, if he's been tested a little bit more than Jacobs has since his return from his bout with cancer.
Yeah, well, first of all, so this fight is being billed as the Battle of Brooklyn?
Yes.
So Quillen's a Brooklyn guy now?
Even though he's from Grand Rapids?
Quillen...
He's from everywhere, though.
Yeah, he's like Lennox Lewis.
Yeah. And now he lives in Miami, and he's so in tune with his Cuban heritage.
Well, yes, that's the other thing, because he's from Grand Rapids, but he also gets to use the nickname Little Chocolate. He gets this old generation. We thought blatantly racial nicknames died with Nigel the Dark Destroyer Ben, but he gets to resurrect this one because his Cuban heritage allows him to use Kid Chocolate. So he's from Grand Rapids, Cuban. So how's he from Brooklyn as well?
He moved to Brooklyn. I don't even think he might not own property in Brooklyn. He might. I don't know. But he might not.
Brooklyn's gentrified. It's hard to own property in Brooklyn.
That's true. It is.
You got to rent.
He might not have his name on an apartment anywhere in Brooklyn.
It's the Battle of Brooklyn.
It's the Battle of Brooklyn.
But here's because of Gleason's gym, and because there's so much that we embrace about boxing's folklore, and because Mike Tyson came from Brooklyn and Riddick Bowe came from Brooklyn, there's still this mystique and this aura about boxing in Brooklyn. And a lot of Daniel Jacobs pre-cancer, a lot of the marketing energy around Daniel Jacobs just came from the fact that he was from Brooklyn.
Exactly, yeah.
And because Mike Tyson was from Brooklyn, Daniel Jacobs is also great by association.
Yeah, Riddick Bowe, they're all from the same block, whatever.
Well, right. And then Daniel Jacobs lost to Dmitry Pirog, and then you're saying to yourself, was he as good as people made him out to be? Or did he just get the marketing push that comes from the fact that he was from Brooklyn?
Well, back to cheering for Zab Judah. Well, here we go.
Exactly. And this is one of these things that, that Quillen is clearly trying to tap into. And if I'm advising Peter Quillen, looking at pay-per-view numbers, looking at viewership numbers, there's no marketing advantage in marketing yourself as a Cuban. So you don't have to shave the Cuban flag into your hair anymore and then try to dye it with the colors. Remember that? And then the white streaks in the Cuban flag, they kind of came out yellow.
Yeah, right.
No need to do that because Cuban fighters don't draw big TV audiences. No one is going to tune in and say, "Ooh, I need to watch this Cuban."
You know who does sell pay-per-views though, Morgan?
Who's that?
Fighters from Grand Rapids. That's where you should be. So Grand Rapids, the Michigan flag. Just go with it.
Well, right. Just tap into the Elite by Association because we're both from Grand Rapids, or tap into the Elite by Association because we're all from Brooklyn. Don't worry.
One.
Right.
Oh, man.
Honor your Cuban heritage, fine, but it's just not going to market you. Not in the United States.
Should be a fun fight nonetheless. We'll break it down next week on Boxing Weekly. When we come back, we'll give you our YouTube picks of the week. That's coming up here on Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Welcome back to Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Corey Urban, Morgan Campbell here with you. Time for our YouTube picks of the week. So we're going to upload these to the playlist. You can check them all out along with all the fights we've uploaded in the past. All right, we like to connect our fights to things we've talked about in this broadcast. So in honor of network cable fights taking place in Texas, in honor of network cable fights taking place in Texas featuring former circus performers like Alexis Camacho was this past weekend, how about Jorge Paez's IBF featherweight title defense against Stevie Cruz from back in 1989 in El Paso? This is a fantastic fight. Two great things about this broadcast, and you can find it on YouTube. Number one, seeing Ferdy Pacheco getting a tour of Jorge Paez's wardrobe. That is awesome. This was also, Morgan, you will like this. This is also the broadcast. This came on directly after the NFL's Fastest Man race in 1989.
Which is, all those highlights have been scrubbed from YouTube because the NFL doesn't want you knowing how fast its players actually are. They'd rather just have you hear the hand time 40-yard dash times and then just guess at how fast they actually are. Too much on the line. People don't want to be embarrassed.
Yeah. Morgan, what do you got?
So, 30th anniversary of this fight is coming up this weekend, and also in honor of taking some of these guys out of the realm of the abstract and actually letting you guys see them in action. This fight right here, Donald the Lone Star Cobra Curry against Milton the Iceman McCrory from December 6th, 1985. Because these two guys were on this collision course for a couple of years atop the welterweight division. Really dynamic fight. Short fight. Donald Curry was before he just burned out the weight class, was an absolute dynamo at welterweight, and really an underrated fighter from the 80s. So watch this fight because again, this was like a big title unification clash, a really low point in Mills Lane's career because Mills Lane almost lets one of these fighters die. Like, I don't know what Mills Lane is doing at the final moments of this fight. But high stakes fight contested at a high skill level, but it's short.
And if you want to meet Milton McCrory, great guy, just walk into the Kronk Gym any day in Detroit. He's there basically every single day.
Perfect.
There you go. All right, that is all the time we have for this week's edition of Fight Network Boxing Weekly. We'll be back to break down Quillen and Jacobs next week. Enjoy the fights this weekend, guys. We'll see you soon.